Jane Austen's novel Emma was first published in December 1815. It takes place in the fictional village of Highbury and nearby estates like Hartfield, Randalls, and Donwell Abbey. The story follows the relationships between a few local families. The important characters include Emma Woodhouse, a wealthy, intelligent, and confident 20-year-old. She enjoys matchmaking but often misjudges situations leading to personal growth. Mr. George Knightley, a wise and respected landowner, Emma's brother in law and close friend. He is the only one who openly critiques Emma, helping her mature. Mr. Woodhouse, Emma's elderly father, overly cautious and fearful of change. He relies on Emma for companionship. Harriet Smith, a sweet but naive 17-year-old of unknown parentage, Emma takes her under her wing, trying to find her a suitable match. Frank Churchill, a charming but unreliable young man, initially considered a match for Emma, he is secretly engaged to Jane Fairfax. Jane Fairfax is beautiful, accomplished, and reserved. Unlike Emma, she lacks wealth and faces an uncertain future until her marriage to Frank Churchill. Mrs. Weston, formerly Emma's governess, now happily married. She remains a caring mentor to Emma. Mr. Weston is a cheerful and sociable man, Frank Churchill's father. Let's see the summary of the novel. Emma Woodhouse is a rich, beautiful, and privileged young woman who believes she is an excellent matchmaker. She takes pride in arranging relationships and is convinced that she understands love better than anyone else. When her beloved governess, Miss Taylor, marries Mr. Weston, Emma is pleased with herself for bringing them together. Encouraged by this success, she decides to help her new friend Harriet Smith find a suitable husband. Harriet is a kind but simple young woman of uncertain parentage, and Emma believes she deserves to marry a gentleman. When Mr. Martin, a respectable farmer, proposes to Harriet, Emma convinces her to reject him, thinking that Harriet can do better. Instead, Emma encourages Harriet to admire Mr. Elton, the charming local vicar, believing he is interested in Harriet. Emma's longtime friend Mr. Knightley disapproves of her interference and warns her against matchmaking. Emma ignores his advice and continues to believe that Mr. Elton is in love with Harriet. However, she is completely mistaken. Mr. Elton has no interest in Harriet at all and is instead in love with Emma. When he confesses his feelings, Emma is shocked and embarrassed. Harriet is heartbroken, and Mr. Elton, feeling humiliated by Emma's rejection, leaves for Bath. Realizing her mistake, Emma decides to give up matchmaking and be more careful about making assumptions. Meanwhile, Jane Fairfax, a beautiful and accomplished young woman, returns to Highbury to visit her aunt Miss Bates and her grandmother. Orphaned as a child, Jane was raised by her father's friends, the Campbells, and is expected to become a governess since she has no money of her own. Emma has mixed feelings about Jane, both admiring and resenting her. She even suspects that Jane has a secret romance with Mr. Dixon, the husband of her friend. Around the same time, Frank Churchill, the son of Mr. Weston, is expected to visit after many delays. He was raised by his wealthy and demanding aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Churchill, in London. Emma looks forward to meeting him and is quickly charmed by his playful and flirtatious nature. However, Mr. Knightley dislikes him, seeing him as shallow and insincere. When Mr. Elton returns from Bath with his new wife, Mrs. Elton, Emma finds her to be rude and self important. Mrs. Elton takes an immediate interest in Jane and treats her as a charity case, much to Jane's discomfort. Meanwhile, Frank pays a great deal of attention to Emma, leading everyone to believe they are a perfect match. Emma enjoys his company but realizes she is not truly in love with him. Instead, she encourages Harriet to take an interest in Frank, believing he is a better match for her than Mr. Elton ever was. Throughout the story, misunderstandings and misinterpretations abound. Characters play word games, exchange riddles, and write letters, each believing they understand others' feelings. Emma assumes she knows everyone's secrets, but she is often mistaken. When Mr. Elton rudely refuses to dance with Harriet at a party, Mr. Knightley steps in to dance with her, impressing Emma with his kindness. This leads Emma to believe that Harriet might be falling in love with Frank, though she is unaware of Harriet's true feelings. Emma continues to misinterpret events around her. When Mrs. Weston suggests that Mr. Knightley might have feelings for Jane, Emma dismisses the idea but begins to feel uneasy. At the same time, she becomes more aware of how her actions affect others. When she cruelly mocks Miss Bates during a social gathering, Mr. Knightley scolds her for her behavior. Feeling ashamed, Emma resolves to treat the Bates family with more kindness and respect. A major turning point comes when Mrs. Churchill dies, removing the biggest obstacle to Frank's future. It is then revealed that Frank and Jane have secretly been engaged all along. Frank's flirtation with Emma was merely a cover to hide his true feelings, as his strict aunt had opposed his engagement to Jane due to misunderstandings and pressure. Jane had broken off the engagement and was about to take a job as a governess. Desperate not to lose her, Frank quickly gains his uncle's approval to marry her and they reconcile. Emma is surprised by this revelation, but even more shocking is Harriet's confession that she has fallen in love with Mr. Knightley. This realization deeply unsettles Emma as she suddenly understands that she has loved Mr. Knightley all along. She is filled with regret over her mistakes and fears she may have lost her chance at happiness. Convinced that Mr. Knightley will propose to Harriet, Emma struggles with her emotions. However, to her joy, Mr. Knightley declares his love for her instead. She happily accepts his proposal, realizing that he has always been the one who truly understands her. As the story comes to a close, Emma reflects on her many errors and learns important lessons about humility, self awareness, and the dangers of making assumptions. She is further delighted when Harriet accepts a second proposal from Mr. Martin, realizing that they are truly meant for each other. In the end, three happy marriages take place: Harriet and Mr. Martin, Jane and Frank, and Emma and Mr. Knightley. Emma's own marriage is celebrated as a perfect match of equals, bringing the novel to a satisfying conclusion. Let's discuss the theme that we find in the novel. Like many of Jane Austen's novels, Emma explores 18th century English society and the importance of social status. The wealthy and well mannered people control social interactions, deciding who is invited to events and who can be their friends. Those from lower classes rely on the generosity of the rich. If someone disrupts this order, it often leads to disapproval, as seen when Emma is upset that Mrs. Elton, a lower status woman, dares to nickname Mr. Knightley. Social class influences how characters interact and reveals their personalities. For example, Emma donates to the poor but does not make an effort to befriend Jane Fairfax, and often with talent. How characters use their status shows their kindness or cruelty. Emma, for instance, makes fun of the simple and poor Miss Bates, which Mr. Knightley criticizes as an abuse of her privilege. Mr. Knightley's act of dancing with Harriet after she is publicly rejected by Mr. Elton is seen as a generous and noble act, correcting the Eltons' rudeness. Class also limits people's choices, especially in marriage. Frank Churchill hides his engagement to Jane because his family would disapprove of her low status. Harriet refuses Robert Martin because Emma tells her he is beneath her, while Mr. Elton rejects Harriet for the same reason, she is not wealthy or well connected enough. The novel explores different ideas about marriage. Social status, money, personality, talents, attractiveness, and shared values all play a role in matchmaking. For women, marriage is especially important because they have limited rights and job opportunities. Harriet, for example, cannot understand why Emma wants to stay single and is afraid of becoming a poor, unmarried woman like Miss Bates, who is pitied by society. Emma believes she is a talented matchmaker, but her mistakes teach her that she still has much to learn about love and character. Austen both supports and critiques social expectations around marriage. For example, while Emma thinks Mr. Martin is too lowly for Harriet, Mr. Knightley insists that Harriet would be lucky to marry him because he is a good man. Similarly, though Jane is considered socially inferior to Frank, both Emma and Mr. Knightley later agree that Jane is actually the better person in terms of virtue. Marriage can also change a person's social status. Some characters marry to improve their rank, as seen when Mr. Western's first marriage to a wealthy woman helps him rise in society. Thus, while class shapes marriage choices, marriage can also shape class.